everyone. This is our second video in a series by Haptics to promote best accessibility practices for the Web3 community. The Ethereum Foundation has provided us with a grant for this initiative, so as always, we'd like to first thank them. And the subject of this talk is accessibility testing in the context of Web3 for websites and decentralized applications, or dApps. We are privileged to have with us today Africa Mincey, a full-stack engineer and accessibility specialist. Africa specifically focuses on human-centered full-stack web development, assistive technology, and web accessibility. She has extensive experience in both Section 504 and Section 508 of the ADA through her government work and auditing. In addition, she shares her expertise and extensive domain knowledge with others through her amazing content. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Africa.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's get started. We're going to go into the questions. So first, what accessibility testing tools and resources do you reference and recommend for developers both in Web 2 and in Web 3?
Some of the ones that I would recommend that are like pretty simple to use, I wouldn't say simple, but they're easy to access, would probably be WebAim, the WebAim web tool. This is like an extension that you can use through your browser. There's also the DexAx tools. And one that's already within your browser usually are the Google Dev Tools. So that would be like Lighthouse, and they have a really nice accessibility tree that shows you kind of like visually what's on your page through text. So that's pretty cool.
And that's pretty straightforward to get started with once you download it and set it up, correct?
Yeah. If you want some quick automated tools to use that may not catch everything, will not catch everything, but it will at least give you like a good place to start, I would start there for sure.
So once you're set up with that, a very important question I wanted to touch upon, and perhaps this can be later opened up as part of a larger conversation. So accessible design is a dynamic process that constantly needs testing and retesting. Sometimes changes that work for one group may not work for everyone. So have you encountered any examples of a code or design change that was intended to help one person, but broke behavior or needed further refinement or fixing for others?
Yeah, I really like this question because I feel like there are a lot of good, very specific examples of that. But one that does come up often and does cause, some of these things, everyone kind of has a different opinion on how to change it, which makes it even more difficult to manage because there are guidelines and then there's like what the human eye or perception is seeing anyways. So one of those things is color contrast because there are pretty standard guidelines on like what the color contrast of your page should look like so that everyone or most people can perceive it easily, because there are people who may have low vision, where color contrast is very important for them to look at and see whatever's on the page. And sometimes the color contrast may not meet the standards, but still is perceivable. And sometimes if you change it, like sometimes we'll change the color to make it actually meet those standards, but then it becomes even harder to see. So there's like little things like that. And then thinking about the fact that a lot of us have astigmatism. So like dark backgrounds with like white text. A lot of people think that, oh, visually this contrast is perfect for the eye, but sometimes contrast color and things like that may be harder for people with different like things going on with their eyes to see. So astigmatism is an interesting one because a lot of us have astigmatism and we assume that like this darker background would be helpful, but it's just harder for our eyes to even perceive. And I had a personal experience with that myself, going all dark with all of my screens and then having a really hard time and not knowing why. Like, darn, it's like harder for me to see now. It's because of like the shape of the lens of your eye. There's also people who are colorblind where like color contrast is even more important for them because they are only seeing, a few colors. So as you can see, it can get really sticky and tricky when you're talking about certain things. But the guidelines are kind of just there as like, hey, this is best practice, but sometimes best practice doesn't work for everybody.
That makes a lot of sense. Would theming and offering different options be a good strategy around that then?
Um, you know, if you mean theming, like having like a style sheet that has like a specific color scheme that you can choose from,
Like flitted on the UI or
yeah, that could work. I think things like this, people, if you talk about it first, right? If you
Mhm.
experiment with those colors and talk about it as you're planning the design, rather than like after you've made the whole app and now like you're like, oh man, we have to change everything on
Right.
the color is not going to work for a lot of people, right? And that's money on the table. Like
Mhm.
people are going to bounce from your website because they can't read it. You just lost money. Like, a lot
Right.
of people cannot see your stuff. So talk about that first in the beginning. Like, what are our color schemes going to look like? What's the background color? What's the text going to look like? These are like style choices that really matter and will be the first reason why people are like, I'm out on your website.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's the first impression.
Right, right. Like anybody, other than the speed of how fast you get there, which can be a whole thing. The like if I get there and I can't read it, I'm just like, I'm gonna find another option.
Moving forward in our topic of design, I wanted to bring up mobile first design. So, mobile first design is an important consideration in building accessible applications. What are some considerations and techniques that teams can incorporate to make web apps accessible for mobile users?
I think a good thing to consider first is that many people may not have a computer, and they're using their phone as their primary source of getting access to anything, right? Or paying for their bills or listening to music or reading articles. So mobile first is what most people are probably going to see on your website. So I love that mobile first is a thing that we all know is what we should be doing now. But talking about mobile first, and talking about color contrast, that is one thing I think that people really don't think about because of those bounce rates and just being able to navigate. If you have a smaller screen, the colors you use really do matter. So just paying attention to that and making your style choices readable. I think another thing is because you're working with a smaller screen, you really do have to be mindful of like gesture space, not making like the gestures that you put on your app very complicated because people may not have dexterity in their hands that allow that. They may not have the cognitive function to make complex gestures. And the width of like where they tap sometimes needs to be a little bit maybe larger than what you would normally have because it's harder for them to have the precision to do that. They may be using tools to use their screen or navigate their screen. Another thing would be a lot of people use screen readers with their devices, and screen readers help a multitude of people, not just blind individuals who make up a pretty large part of our population, but also people who may have like lower vision or people who have a hard time reading, so may have like dyslexia, or they may have like a cognitive something going on where it's harder for them to read, so they're using screen readers too. So just making sure that your app can be used at all with a screen reader is a really good practice. Making sure that your pages can be magnified like 400% without it messing up your whole page, making sure that you can look at it in like horizontal and vertical without it breaking. These things sound, maybe, I don't know if they sound basic, but they're often the things that are not available for people to use. I think another thing would be like making sure the layout of each page is consistent. So like if I go to one page and I go to another, like the context of the whole page doesn't switch around and I have to figure out where to find things. So like having a very distinct sitemap And the last thing would probably be like using plain language, not putting like a whole block of text on your like page where I have to read through this large block of text to figure out what's going on. Like there's no bullet points, there's no white space, you're using jargon, there's no bolded, there's no headings. I'm like, what's up with this? I don't want to, so just being mindful of things like that. And make sure that your buttons, your links, and your forms that people are using are accessible and can be used. So that's more like code based, like just making sure that they're labeled and there's descriptions so that if I'm going through it, I know what are you asking of me? Can my
Mm.
screen reader or can my device actually read that this is a form that's for my name that I need to type in? And making it easy for people, like having autofill, using radio buttons when you can, because it's just easier to tap that radio button. These are all little things. I could go on, but those are the main things.
No, absolutely makes sense, and kind of like analysis of a lot of dApps that are currently out there. A lot are actually designed more for desktop as like a first
Right.
tool. So then you open it on mobile, or for people not aware, non-developers, you can open up in Chrome. You can get like a nice like mobile view. Or in any
Mm-hmm.
other browser, you can get a mobile view, and you'll see immediately the UI like collapses and things are
Right.
overlapping.
Right. And that's so important because so many of the websites, like you're on mobile and you're like, I mean, we know you're like, dang, they didn't do mobile first.
Yeah.
Like mess up your whole website. And that's how almost everyone's going. Like no one's on their very little people are on their computers these days. Like we are on
Mhm.
our computers all the time because that's our tool that we use to create things and make money. But
Right.
other people, you know, using their phones for everything.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense, and something important to be mindful of. So you touched upon technical terms or like too much jargon and like bad formatting of text. So I want to gravitate towards that. So the blockchain and Web3 space tends to use a lot of technical terms in our applications and documentation. What are
Mhm.
some good techniques for creating content that leverages more inclusive language and terms that can simplify these complicated workflows and app interactions? And then the follow up to that is how to best find that balance in avoiding over explaining versus under explaining.
Yeah, this is great. I would say the first thing to consider is like know the people that you're serving and who you may be serving. And that would be putting a name to like these different populations and what they may be dealing with and what will make it harder for them to process all of these extra words. Like I think for a lot of us that's hard. So like, ADHD, it's really hard to like be able to just like concentrate and look at everything. You have all like people with autism and learning disabilities and cognitive injuries, and there's so many things. And then you just have, everyone else. We all want an experience where we don't have to like figure out what's happening with a bunch of words that you're telling us. So I feel like with in tech, like a lot of the documentation, I cannot figure out what's going on because I have to Google every other word. And it's like
Mm.
when I Google it, I'm like, you could have just written that. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
one thing that's always at the top of my mind, and is something that we should all be super mindful of, is acronyms. Like we use a lot of acronyms, I think, in
Yes.
tech. And we have the assumption that people are going to know exactly what we're talking about when we say it. And that's just not the case. So even if like it's not that I've never come across it as, a person who may not have any disabilities or whatever. For another person, they may have come across it, but like every time they see this acronym, it's hard for them to grasp or remember like where that comes from. So each time they have to try a lot harder just to get through what you're doing because they're using all this extra brain energy, right? And me too, because I'm like, I don't know whatever whatever thing you're putting on here is. I have to really think about it. So like that's a really easy, I think, simple way to be human-centered in your approach to writing documentation and writing things on your website. Just if you're going to write the acronym, put in parentheses after it what it is, and then you can keep using the acronym because at least now I know what it is and you can reference that throughout your text. So that's like a really, I think, simple implementation to be more clear. Another thing is, and I'm guilty of this, oh, so guilty of it. Like my own business page, I have to constantly change to be more plain language because what I do is complex in a way. So I'm explaining it with all of these words and these run-on sentences, trying to stuff descriptions in it to be more clear when it's like sometimes you need to just chop your sentence in half.
Mm-hmm.
And if you chop it in half, at least I can figure out what this one sentence is and go on to the next one. So that just cognitively is easier for everyone involved, and really helpful for those who need that extra clarity. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but also like visually, it's always going to be easier for us to read things in bullets with headings and white space. So just making sure that like everything is not just glopped onto your page is super helpful. So just using plain language, using words that are simply descriptive and not like some word where I have to like figure out or think about what it is, I think is the most helpful. And then breaking down the steps. If you're explaining how to do something in your documentation or on your website, think about each step as a sequence and go through that yourself and put all of those steps in there, because half the time you're missing something, and this is what's going to make it even harder for me. I think I'm really smart. I think I'm really smart.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
out here struggling all the time reading documentation, and then figuring out for myself that 4 steps have been cut out of this explanation that you're giving me to follow along on your tutorial. So I think that goes a long way. And all of these things sound like a lot, but if you just do that, if you make it a practice, it takes you an extra 5 minutes, maybe. And then you're including all of these other people who can use your stuff, and your own clients and your own workers. Your own people will be able to use your things more quickly and understand more quickly. So I think it's worth it. Personally, I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Even in research papers, like you could have a very complex research paper, you have to label what the acronym is. And then, like you said, then you can continue to use it. But somewhere, whether it's in the abstract or explained each as you need it, it has to be labeled.
Yeah, and I'm like, we all know this, but for some reason like in especially like full stack web, like anything
Mm.
coding related where you're learning another language, I don't know if it's like I'm like, is this a form of gatekeeping? Not sure, but what the heck? Like, come on, that just spell it out. We won't think you're less for doing that. Like it will be helpful for all of us. So I think that it's so simple, but it's like a very big barrier for like just understanding, and the run-on sentences where it's like, missing steps and then a glob of text.
Yeah, absolutely.
My pet peeves, I'm like, hopefully this sprinkles along and documentation will be changed forever.
Okay, so we'll pause there. Shall we jump into the accessibility testing and demo portion?
Yeah, let me make sure I have everything pulled up.
Sure thing. And then while you're prepping that, I just wanted to comment that so we're going to share 2 examples today. We're going to have the first example is a website. It's just the UI UX. And then the second example is a full stack app. It has serverless backend. There's the front end, and then there's also a deployed contract. It's a simulation of a staking app. So users would stake their currency, earn rewards, and then they could withdraw at any point those with their stake and rewards. And that smart contract, by the way, is deployed on Sepolia. So like all the information's there in the repo. And both of these applications are, to be clear, examples of what not to do. So we're going to be testing it and showing you, hey, this is why you shouldn't do this. So it'll be there as a good resource for anybody who wants to retest for themselves in their learning journey. Whenever you're ready, Africa, no rush.
All right. So what I'm gonna do is first walk you through the tools that I have and how I would approach just looking at this off the top. So the tools that I use are Wave, which is up here. So Wave is a web accessibility evaluation tool. It's by WebAim, and it kind of will give you like some errors and explain what the errors are and often how to change it. But I don't do automated testing first. I just want to show you the tools. The second one would be Axe Dev tools that I use sometimes. This is also an extension. If I just click out of here. So that's another one. And then the other look at would be the inspect tool, because Google already has something baked in it, which is our accessibility tree that kind of shows us what's on the page. So we'll get to that later. So those are the main automated tools that I use. But what I like to do first is just objectively look over the page and see what I notice first. And then I like to just use my keyboard and manually go through. And the reason that I do that is because visually, I want to see the first things that pop out to be mindful of and know that that needs to be changed. And then the second thing is the manual testing, which is that visual look. The manual testing is mostly making sure that everything on your web page is accessible by keyboard. Because there are many, 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 many users who do not use a mouse at all. They don't use a mouse. Whether that be for cognitive reasons or fine motor impairments or brain injuries or any bevy of things. They may be using assistive technology like a specialized keyboard or screen reader to navigate. And that means if they cannot do something on your website with the keyboard, then they're not using your website. And that's a lot of people. So the first thing that I notice as I come on here is you may have like some color contrast issues going on with this background, like the white on the like blue and the purple, these are kind of light, and this is a little bit hard to see. This is pretty hard to see in general. And that's just visually up. Yeah, and like this is hard to see. So those would be like pretty straightforward things to go and CSS and change. And if I wanted to actually check to see if this is color contrast is okay, I use something called contrast, but actually this is what I use because I have a MacBook and I just think the UI is so cute. So I like to use it, but most people should probably use the color contrast analyzer. That's like the more official one and would be able to be used with Windows and with Apple computers. So I'm going to use contrast because it's cute and easy to show. It's right here. And the way that we use that is, let's see, drag this over. So I would just use this little dropper and find the color, and then use this little dropper to find the background, and it tells me immediately if it fails or not. So if I do this as I'm building my page, then I don't have to worry about it. I can just be like, I think these two colors look great together because I have good taste or whatever. And then I can be like, all right, this is not going to work because it's failing this check. And then just be mindful, if something looks amazing, like, and it's very close to the number, I think the number is 4.5 to 1 is what the contrast should be. And the great thing about this is you don't have to remember that because it's just going to tell you fail or pass. And it's very quick to use. The color contrast that I explained before, that app also, the web app does the same thing. It just has an uglier UI. It's not their fault though. All right, so that's one thing I would do to start. And then I would just check all of these. Like I already know that these are going to fail, right? Because if this is failing, then anything below that looks lighter will fail as well. So I would just change all of that. So the second thing I would do is just go through with my keyboard and see if I can tab through the whole thing. So right now I'm using the tab button. Okay, okay. So I'm not sure if it's actually tabbing through this stuff because there should be a focus on everything that it tabs through. So if this is clickable, it would jump here and show me that I'm tabbing on it, because if I can't see that I'm tabbing on it, then I'm not going to know like where I am on the page. And you have a hamburger menu here, and I usually go off about hamburger menus because inherently they like, if you just code yourself a hamburger menu, like dry code it with just like, here's a hamburger menu, it's not accessible. Like people cannot get to it unless they can use a mouse. And remember, that's a lot of people who are not using a mouse. And some people just choose not to use a mouse as well, as you get into those circles of people who are like true computer nerds. So they're like, no, I cannot get into your hamburger menu. I have to use the mouse. Awful, bouncing to the next page. But anyways, so that's pretty important. So when you are making your hamburger menu, there's many things you have to be mindful of. Like I have to make sure that I can get here if I'm tabbing. And I'm actually going to do a stream on like building an accessible hamburger menu. But every time I started it, we like run out of time. So I'm like, I think we have to have a hamburger menu stream. So yeah, so they're not going to be able to navigate anywhere. And here you can kind of see that it's jumping. Is it jumping to Bitcoin? Yeah, see, it's jumping to Bitcoin in this one, but you also have this other one highlighted, the first Bitcoin. Do you see how down here it's kind of like jumping the colors? Yeah, that wouldn't be enough for me to know. So these are what we call critical fails. So we would have to just start here. Like your page is not usable for like many people. So another thing I would do is use a screen reader to kind of see what's on here. I'm not going to go through the whole screen reader thing, but you can download NVDA, or you can use VoiceOver on Apple, and it will read through your page. And if it's not reading certain things, then that means no one's going to know it's there if they're using a screen reader. And let's go to our automated tests. Now that we know, I mean, we know that if we found all those things, we're going to find like a bunch of errors on our automated tests. And they're kind of fun to go through. So I like to look at it first like this, because for me, I'm Nancy Drew, Sherlock Holmes. I want to see how right I was and what the little automated test could pick up. So this is like my favorite part. All right, so it shows that we have 14 errors. We have 56 contract. That's actually the most I've ever seen, to be honest. Oh, wowzers.
Kudos to my teammate who designed this.
Man, props to y'all. Like, you did that.
This was of course intended to be like to showcase like
Yeah.
errors in the wild, but
Love it. Also, oh my gosh, carousels, hate them.
that's why it's there.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, to make an accessible carousel, you're just gonna have to do a lot of extra work. So just don't, unless you really like, you're like, I need accessible, I need a carousel, or my whole page is gonna fail. Then figure out how to do that, because that's a whole stream by itself too. All right. I'm like, nothing should be this hard. If it's this hard, it wasn't meant to be. Okay, so let's go to the details, figure out what these errors are. So you have no alternative text. We talked about that before we started recording, so I won't even get into it. But alternative text, people, do it. Explain what's on the page. You have an empty button, probably like an empty link that goes nowhere because this is a test page. So these are all empty links. That's fine. Your links should always be descriptive and tell people where they're going. So a good example of this is like Bitcoin Light. Where is this taking me? Who knows? Not sure. What else? Oh man, this is my favorite pastime, y'all, roasting websites. So like, yeah. Okay. So a lot of contrast errors. We already know about that. Let's see. 7, a nearby image has the same alternative text. Yeah, so that would be not great because that would assume that you have 7 pictures that are all the same. And we assume that that's not the case. Heading levels, oh my gosh, heading levels matter. They do. So always start with heading 1. Make sure you have a page title that's descriptive and talks about what's happening on your page. Let's see if you did that. All right, make lots of money with Bitcoin. All right, I guess, but what is this? There's a lot of websites where you can buy crypto, but this is the best one. All right, crypto marketplace or something would be, a more descriptive title that'll tell me exactly where I am. And that's what you have up here. So now I know, which is good. But is this tagged as a heading level 1 or is this tagged as a heading level 1? What do you think would be the heading level 1 on this page? If you're not just doing it for the style, which we're not going to do ever. We know that, I hope. What do you think? Crypto market, or is this the best platform? Or this is the best platform? Oh, and this is the heading 1. This one probably is not tagged then, right?
I don't believe so. My teammate made sure to replicate messed up heading structures.
Oh, okay. This is a link. Sorry, it wasn't showing me correctly what it was. So this is like the little
Logo.
yeah, it's like a logo. So that makes sense. And this logo probably needs to be descriptive in what it is. Um, is this text though? Or is it a picture? That's what I'm confused about. But anyways, as you can see, it's pretty, they made it pretty simple for you to just click on the little logo and then go through what all the errors are. And then you can click on each one and then it'll tell you kind of like what's going on here, right? You have an unordered list that's bulleted. It's just telling you like what's on each thing. So empty link contains no text. So you can kind of figure out how to change your code based off of this. But this isn't telling you what I just told you, right? As we did it manually, which is why manual testing, like automated testing without manually testing first or at least after, is almost pointless because there are certain things that it's not going to catch. It's only going to catch enough for you to be like, okay, I have a reference to what to change and how to change it in a way, right? But the rest I do have to figure out. So that's how I would do that. The last thing I wanted to kind of show you would be the lighthouse tools. So if we go to our inspect tool, if I want to quickly understand what assistive technology would see or say to an assistive technology user, I could click here to get to our web accessibility tree, which is right here. And this kind of tells us what's going to be said to the screen reader or whatever they're using to interpret what's on your page. So it's showing that all of these things are focusable, which is good because you should be able to get to them. But we could still see that like there was no focus ring, all that stuff you can do through CSS. And you can see where it has like a list, but this list is empty. So the person would probably just hear like an empty like list, and they'll just be like, what is this? And it has like the heading. So it's going to say heading, make a lot of money with Bitcoin, paragraph, blank, because you have a paragraph here. It looks like you have a paragraph, but it may be just an empty, well, no, here it is. So it'll say paragraph and then whatever's in there. So all this stuff is going to be read out. So you want to look at it and just make sure that that's what's on the page and nothing has been skipped. But using the screen reader would be the best way to do that. But this is just like a good visual. Like, let me just look really quickly, make sure everything is actually on here and makes sense. So that's the quick down and dirty, like, here's what I would do really fast and what you can start with yourself, as you're looking at your own.
So now, shall we do the second one?
Yeah, let's do the second one.
Okay, so now I'm gonna do a screen share, and then Africa's gonna walk me through it. Okay, so can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. So we know that you have everything that I was using downloaded. You have we all have inspect, you have the wave. Wave is what I like to use the most. I didn't choose the other ones, but wave is just like the easiest. There are a few other ones you can use, but let's use wave. But before we use wave, the first thing we're going to do is address this privacy policy that just popped up because that's wild.
Yup.
Can you imagine if you're using assistive technology and like you get to a page and this big pop-up comes up and it's going to read all of that and then you're going to be like, what the heck? So yeah, that's a big red flag.
It's been seen though, natively.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's here.
I love that. Yeah, definitely. I think I think what I want to reiterate is that like I know I'm like roasting it and stuff, but people just don't know and haven't thought about like, oh, there's people using these things. So that's why I want to keep saying like, just think about the fact that these people that you didn't know exist are using these devices and this is how it's going to read it. And there's more of them than you think, because people think that people with disabilities don't go on the internet and use their products, but they do.
No, absolutely. And then, yeah, to further your point, it's not like to attack, it's to call people in and like say, hey, just a friendly reminder, like it's negligence, not maliciousness, just hey,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, my
this.
personality is like to crack a lot of jokes, but I'm
absolutely.
But I love you guys, and I really, we're all learning together because I had to learn it myself. The only reason I knew was because I was working with the population. I was like, dang, there's a lot of stuff you can't use, man. And they're like, yeah, doesn't it suck? And I'm like, actually, it does. I hate that for you. Let's do better.
So I want to show you something before we even go into this. So this is so right when I launched it, this popped up, and just one comment, there may be some legal reasoning that we have to be careful with here. So like if it's the case that you have to have the user accept something, there's a little bit more to it. But back to your point, Africa, that it has to be perceivable. And I want to show you something. So I'm clicking outside the boundary. I can't get out of it.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to tab, watch. So yeah, it goes through all that stuff. Hang on. And then watch, I'm going to go onto the page. Did you see that?
That it popped up that random thing? Is it not going to the box?
Nope.
Yeah, so that's like another thing that happens a lot where you can't interact with the pop-up and it changes the focus. So at work we see a lot of websites that do this. And people just, like it really just takes remembering, hey, maybe I need to use my keyboard to use whatever it is. If it can't be used, then that's a lot of people. So that's, that's just like some HTML and something, something simple that you can just like put in there, like some CSS and maybe a little JavaScript that'll help you get to your actual box when it pops up. Um, but yeah, that would be one thing. And if that's an interesting, I was wondering if it was like a legal thing maybe that they needed to put it in there, and I'm wondering if it's like, do they need to do that before getting to the site, or like is there like a more graceful, elegant way to not have it be a pop-up that just pops up like that when you first get to the page? That's an interesting question and would be
Yeah, it's
something
it's an open-ended for myself as well. So definitely something to like open up to others.
you wouldn't really think about it. You just be like, well, obviously we can just plop it on here and move on.
So moving past this already showstopper for like anybody on a keyboard or like a switch, I'm gonna with the mouse hit accept and continue. And okay, so pause here.
So what else would you be looking for right now if we're just like giving it a glance to make sure?
Mhm. So like you mentioned, color contrast, just kind of like looking at it. There's to my eye, it looks okay, but if we opened up Wave, I'm sure maybe there would be something that would pop up.
Maybe, yeah. And then another thing we didn't talk about was zooming in and out, making sure that it doesn't break the whole page. So you can zoom in 400%. And what we would like to happen is that you don't need to horizontally scroll to navigate. And that's just like CSS media query type stuff that you'd have to figure out. And there's like, simple ways to do that, and also hard ways. And I've done both. And wow, I'm like, this takes too long to figure out. But so this is 400%.
Let me double check. No, this is 200
Ooh,
or
okay.
400.
You can see you do have a horizontal scroll, but there's probably a way for you to code this to where there will not be a horizontal scroll. So something to think about that people probably don't think about that much. And then you go down and it looks like they've collapsed on each other.
Mhm.
So now they're not usable. Um, and that's just like making your, yeah, mobile first. And also just, that's something I didn't really learn until I started really, really learning about web accessibility. I was like, dang, I've never thought about what my thing looks like if I zoom in 400%.
Mhm.
My whole
Mhm.
page broke, and I was like, gosh.
No, absolutely. And then like I'm just showing others, like a lot of devs know this, that there's a window that you open up. So let me go
Oh,
back.
yeah, yeah, that's great.
So I
I feel
go.
like that's not that well known either.
Mhm. So this helps with what we talked about earlier, mobile first design. You can see
Mhm.
like iPhone, Samsung Galaxy. I'm on 20 Ultra. Let's go to like S8.
I don't use this enough. I need to start using it a lot more.
Um, and then also with component libraries, there's often like some options that like it makes it a bit quicker that you can be like, oh, okay, if it's you can label it like if it's small, we want it to be this wide and this high. If it's medium, we do this, like meaning the size of the user screen to
Right,
make it more
right.
dynamic.
That's cool.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so we found what, 3 or 4 things already, and then, just try to navigate, tab through everything and see if you can get to everything without your mouse.
Let's see. So
Okay, see, we got some focus. Love that. Okay.
didn't make a cool drop down. Drop down was just default. Um,
Love it. Let's see if we can get to the Connect wallet. Wait, are you in a trap right now? Okay.
I don't know. We're on the so if I connect the comments for Web3 natives, non Web3 natives. The Connect wallet right now is just like for show connected to this application in a serverless function. If you like invoke stake or unstake, it sends a post request and it'll connect the app wallet and do the stake and unstake to the actual contracts deployed on Sepolia. Intention was to help simulate and make it easier for us when we're doing the accessibility testing. So if I connect the wallet, success, your wallet is connected.
Perfecto. And then one of the things we would check is that can be heard by a screen reader. But screen readers are a whole thing. I mean, they really aren't. It's really like every computer has one in them. And everyone should try to use one once. If you're a dev and you've never used a screen reader, just like make it a goal in life to just do it one time. Because a lot of people use screen readers, not just blind people. So we can go through and hopefully our screen reader would be reading all of this. Type
It jumped.
So is it losing focus? So this would be out of focus, like it's out of order. The focus order doesn't make sequential sense. So that's another thing that like is a pretty high level of failure. And that's like CSS probably that you can change to make that make more sense. All right, so it looks like you have maybe like 5 or 6 defects just like from manual testing, that will probably not show up if we do the automated testing. So the automated testing is going to give us some more information that we could have found manually testing. You can manually test and not need automated tests, but automated tests are really nice because it just makes everything quicker. So let's go to WebAim and see very quickly what we can find. And I want to reiterate, we're not looking like there's many more things that we could do to test this page to make sure that it's fully accessible, but that would take some time. So I just want to give you some, if you can even get 75%, 50% of the way there, that's more than zero. So like, this is a great start. So it says you have 18 alerts and 4 errors. That's not too bad. And it says you have 0 contrast errors, which seems to be the case. But we would still need to manually check the areas that look like they may have some issues, because the contrast automated checkers do not check everything, and there may be many errors for contrast. So I want to be very clear about that, which is why I don't really use it. If it flags something, that means that it's so obvious that like, you know what I mean? So you need to, like, for example, features, pricing, drop down, that at the top, that probably fails, but it didn't fit. So these automated tests, they're really not going to find everything. They're just going to be like, here are the glaring issues. So let's go to details, view details. So your areas are just that you have empty buttons, which you would have to begin with, right? Because this is not a real page. So your buttons are not going to go anywhere, and that's fine. Suspicious alternative text. Your alternative text may just not be descriptive enough, or it may be like random. So if you're not explaining what's on there, it's just like, yeah, many people are not going to be able to understand what's there. You skip some heading levels. That's just semantic stuff that you can look in there and change. And then the rest, no script element. So I'm guessing that's at the top, some HTML script stuff that you got to add in there to make more sense. But yeah, I mean, overall, not too bad, right? Because those are things that were kind of like inherently would come up. So I would say this looks like it's doing some good stuff, but then again, we just found like 6 things without this. So That's why it's like, you really got to just manually test, or just like just using Wave is not really going to get you where you need to go.
Mhm. Yeah, this one was designed to be a bit more subtle, to just to bring up that point you just brought up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
so that's how I would do this one. And like you can see like the check for us didn't take a long time. What takes a long time is probably me explaining what everything is, but you yourself, if you do those quick checks, you wouldn't really like some of this wouldn't have to happen if you just did it, if you were mindful of it as you were building, right? You wouldn't have to worry about contrast all that much, or whether or not things are going to break as you make them bigger, because you're like, I need to make this way,
mhm,
versus I need to like now change a bunch of code so that it works, which is another thing. So yeah, the Axe Dev tools, I should use it more often, but I am a creature of habit, so I don't use it as much. And the reason you want to use more than one is because it'll find different things. So this is probably going to find a bunch of different things. Um, and I use Axe Dev tools if if I'm making something more complex, or I'm looking at something where it's like, okay, I'm the one who has to make sure that this is like thoroughly looked through, like then I'll use like 3 or 4 of them just to like make sure I found everything. Like if I'm doing an audit for, for money, like for my stuff, I'm like, okay, I have a general idea. Like I know I can use this quickly just to help someone or spot check some stuff. But I like I like Axe because it usually finds things that WebAim doesn't, and vice versa. So I'm curious what it says and if it found anything different. It says 4 too, so maybe it found some of the same stuff. So
mhm,
the buttons we already know. Um, and we want to make sure our buttons are very descriptive and they don't just say like click here or something that is not descriptive. Logos are another thing. So a lot of logos are not accessible, because for people who are using assistive technology, when they get to the logo, it'll just say logo and not explain where it's going. So you have to like just add things like ARIA descriptors, or a lot of it really is just that HTML, CSS extra adding in like little tags to be descriptive about where you are. um, so yeah.
mhm, for sure. And I just turned on best practices and it opened up to 32.
Oh, if you put, I think so, it depends. I think if you put, what happens when you put the 2.1? Because some of them are like, here's what will actually come up as the guidelines, right? Versus,
Mhm.
that's interesting.
Let's
What
see.
happens if you turn it off?
I would
I've
just get
actually never
4.
used that. Yeah, so I think 4 is just telling you probably like what the web content accessibility guidelines, maybe like the things that are like you need to have this,
Mhm,
versus, and this is where you come in to like what we were talking about earlier, where some things help people, but then you have all these other best practices you have to think about, where it's like, if I make this accessible, it's going to mess this thing up. So this could be something interesting to look at. Because sometimes in your code, you have to code something a certain way for it to work, or for it to convey what you needed to convey, but then it'll chop some people out.
mhm.
It's a weird nuanced thing that I would love to hear more people talk about for sure, because it's interesting.
Absolutely.
So heading level should only increase by 1. So you're probably like jumping around in there. Um, so this is interesting because heading levels, there are best practices for heading levels. And even at my job, there are so many things where I'm like, this is not accessible. Like, this is not the best practice, but it passes our audit via
Mm,
law that has been created, right? Which is why every year the W3C is adding to these, guidelines, because they keep finding more things, or, people, there's a group of people that debate like what needs to go on there, how it should be done. But heading levels should go sequentially and not really skip. but you can, and it'll be accessible. But is it really though? No, I don't think so, but that's fine. Like if you're using something, you're literally relying on headings to navigate. So if it switches, it's gonna switch the meaning of what it is because heading level one goes for like the main thing. And I think people have an idea that like heading level two is like maybe one thing, and then heading level three is the next thing when it's like, no, heading level two is a subheading of heading level one, and heading level three is a subheading of heading level two, and heading level four is and then you may like if you're going to go to the next thing, then you have another heading level two, and that meaning is lost on a lot of developers over time, I think. And it's often not really taught because we're just like heading levels. We know it's a thing and we have a general idea of like what they mean. But when you mess with the heading levels, it messes with the structure and how people understand the layout of your website. And it just makes it confusing. But you don't think about it. Like I would have never thought about that myself until like I had blind friends who were like, dang, I can't, now that I'm auditing all day with people who are non-sighted, and I'm like, yeah, you mess with the heading levels and you don't understand the structure of the page. So that's tough and something I wish that people were a little bit more mindful of when they're creating what they're doing on their pages.
Absolutely. And anybody listening to the talk, hopefully more mindful.
Yeah. Me talking for 10 minutes about heading levels. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Everything we've spoken about up until now could be a talk by itself. It's like there's
Yeah.
much more depth
I'm
to it.
like, this is like it's a rabbit hole that I don't know why I'm so fascinated by it, but it's like, guys, there's a whole new world in here. Like, it matters, even though it sounds elementary.
And then just to close this piece, I just wanted to show that it's hooked up to the smart contract. So again, it's anybody using this is using the same wallet, but I have, let me can I clear the console? Yes, just clear that. If you like stake, like let's say like there's a fake token deployed on Sepolia 2, I called it the BS token. And then if you like, let's say we stake like 3, can goes from the wallet and it stakes it. And then this is the blockchain transaction. So actually, if we like, you can see the there's skipping all the cryptographic terminology. There's like the RSV signature and everything. And then if we open up, what's Polius? Here, I have the link on another tab. 1 second. If I go to the, yeah, see 1 minute ago, we had this transaction to stake to the contract. And that went through. This is the app wallet address. And this is the deployed contract. See all the code.
Nice.
But yeah, that's just the Web3 bit.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay, so to close, thank you again so much, Africa, for this talk. It was very insightful, and I hope a lot of people can use what they've learned today in their continued design and learning journey. So I wanted to close with just a general question. So what is your some advice you would have for others who would like to learn accessibility for either their personal work or their company work or for Web3? And then follow up to that, how can you start incorporating these manual testing and automated processing?
Yeah, so I think if you've sat through this whole talk, you have all the tools that you need to get started to at least doing it on your own, because I've given you like, I think just going through all of this, those are the main things. If you want to go further with your education with like just understanding what the laws are or what like the best practices are, course on edX, and it's called Intro to Web Accessibility. It's pretty thorough and it's free unless you want to like get the certificate, which is like $100, but you can go through the whole course and it's really, really thorough. But that may be kind of aggressive for people who want to just like casually learn about it. What I did for myself, as I was learning, it was really hard to find like one place to get a lot of information and to get started with like understanding holistically like what web accessibility was and who it impacts. So I created my own like little mini training with that for myself. So I usually tell people to watch that first. At least gives you like, this is who you're affecting, this is like the general things, and it's a lot of the things that we talked about here and went through. So sometimes I tell people to start there on the YouTube channel. It's just web intro to web accessibility testing and manual testing or something like that. On my YouTube page, which is I think Africa Kenya with an H at the end.
And we'll link it below.
Yeah, we'll link it, but the edX course is really good. Another thing is like, this is really simple, but I'm serious when I say it. If you really want to learn about web accessibility, Google it. Like just Google and read some articles, because there are like 20,000 articles on like, here's 10 ways to have a more web accessible like website. And if you read 4 articles, you'll have like, many tools to get started. And then the last piece for people who are like, okay, I'm in. I like, this sounds like something I actually want to learn and be good at. The way that I learned the web accessibility guidelines, that are like the best practices, under those web content accessibility guidelines, they have a website with all the guidelines. Oh my gosh, it's dry, boring, and awful. And it's good in that it's robust, right? And that you can really learn a lot from it, but it's very dry, very technical, and extremely long. I don't know how many guidelines there are, but maybe let's say there's 50. So there's a lot. There's maybe more than that. I can't remember the number. But what I did was similar to 100 Days of Code, on Twitter, where you say each day what you learned for the day or whatever you did for coding. You could do 100 Days of Ally. So A11Y, 100 Days of Ally, and go through the guidelines one each and tweet them out, just like each day, like day 1, here is a guideline. And I say that because I know people who have done it on Twitter, and I actually did it. And that's how I accidentally learned all these guidelines. And that's how I got a job in this, because I literally was like, I'm going to just do this and learn it, because I cannot imagine going through this and trying to figure it out. So I just literally just read one, tweeted it out, and like went to the next one, tweeted it out. And then by the time I was done, I was like, wow, I've read all of these guidelines, and they're not, it's not rocket science or anything. So once you read it one time, you have an idea of like, all right, this is something to think about. So that's what I would say. Those are my little things that I've done for me. Google is your best friend. If you really want to know something, you can just Google it, and Google or ask ChatGPT, which I have many times for web accessibility related things. May not give you the most accessible code, and it may not make sense, but you can be like, hey, ChatGPT, give me 20 things that I could do to make my website more accessible. And it will give you some good stuff.
That's a good point. The ChatGPT one's a good point.
I'm just saying, like, there's so many ways. And if you're a developer already, you already know, like, if I want to learn something, I'm going to have to figure it out and teach myself and self-engineer how to do this. So really it's up to us, because they're not teaching us this stuff in boot camps or even at college for our nice little bachelors. They're just like, here's how to do the thing, and LOL at everyone else who needs to use it in an alternative way. So I'm happy that like we're all collectively like starting to be more mindful of those populations, because you just don't know until you know, right? Like how are you supposed to know to even think about these things when you've never considered it?
No, absolutely. And we're building the stepping stones for the future as technology advances. So this is absolutely a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for being here with us. Absolute pleasure to have you. And hopefully people will take snippets and apply it, and we just make the web more accessible.
Yes, wouldn't that be make the world a better place, one website at a time?
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.